Hi there, and welcome back to week 3 of Beyond Silicon Valley, Growing Entrepreneurship in Transitioning Economies. Thank you for another great week. The discussion forums were excellent. Learned a lot on what's happening in your communities in terms of role of government, role of donors, and this week talking about intermediary organizations, as I'm calling them, known in most of the communities where you are as NGOs, non-governmental organizations. So we'll talk about the role that they can play in supporting entrepreneurship. We have a great panel today, and as we always do each week, I'll just ask my panelists to quickly introduce themselves, and then we'll get right to your questions. So Laura, if you can start and introduce yourself.
My name is Laura Bennett, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Embrace Pet Insurance.
Great. Let's go to Mete Çakmakaya in Ankara, Turkey. Mete, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. I'm the Secretary General of Technology Development Foundation of Turkey, which is a public-private partnership and a not-for-profit entity.
Great. Thanks, Mete. And our last panelist today is Tony Celestino from Brazil. Hey, Tony. Can you hear me, Tony?
Looks like Tony's having a tech issue on his end, so we can come back to him.
Okay, great. Thanks, Tony. Welcome. So Tony is with the country manager of Up Global in Brazil. Up Global is an NGO supported by a lot of donors, some large donors focused on supporting the entrepreneurship community around the world, and Tony's been leading their efforts in Brazil. So let's get right to the questions. And Laura, I'll start here with you with a question, and then we'll go directly to the chat room. But the first question we had that came into the chat was from Kichita Khanna from India. And she was saying, what is the most preferable source of capital for entrepreneurs? Would it be from venture capital funds, government, or an intermediary organization? You've gotten a little bit from everyone, so maybe you could talk about the challenges of raising capital, and is there one preferred source of capital?
Well, it's a good question, and my answer is always everywhere, anywhere, and whenever you can get it. But I think that quite frankly, preferably, you would take no funding from outside. Having said that, that's generally not the reality of what you could afford, unless most of you have, millions of dollars sitting in your pocket. But so we've, as Michael said, we've done both. We've done pretty much everything. So I raised funding from angels, so people that I knew or people that were in the local community who funded Embrace. And then we also raised money from JumpStart, which is a venture development organization here in Cleveland. And then we moved on to, we needed more money and we wanted to grow. So we raised money from venture capital, and their focus is much more on high growth companies. And then more recently, we've actually swapped out JumpStart and the venture development organization, JumpStart. Our venture capital and JumpStart. And we've now got a private investor. So each one has its niche depending on where you're at in your company's development. So it just really depends on your level of where you're growing and what you have available. So, your reserves in hand. And just as a tip, I would say always get more than one option. If you are looking for money, don't get forced into taking the one thing that comes along.
Great. Let's go to the chat room with a question.
Hi, we have a question from Greg Horn from Kauai, Hawaii. You said at one point that 2 of JumpStart's key metrics for success are generating revenue and creating jobs. Does that mean that the amount of tax revenue coming in from the startups and the number of jobs that they create? Or is it revenue that JumpStart is actually bringing in and the jobs JumpStart is creating? If the latter, how is JumpStart generating revenue?
Great question, Greg. And maybe Mete, let me broaden it beyond just JumpStart and broaden it a little bit to kind of how NGOs measure success. Mete, let me get your perspective on the work that you do at TTGV, probably not pronounced like that in Turkish. Can you talk about how you measure success? Do you look at metrics like the revenue that the companies that you're working with grow? Do you look at tax revenue? Do you look at jobs? How do you measure success?
Well, we measure success at a couple of different dimensions. One is actually we'd like to create visible success stories. When you talk about visible success stories about companies growing fast, creating competitive products for new markets, and of course creating revenue, and we'd like to exit at one point from our investments as well. And I think the point we are trying to make at this point in the current stage of our ecosystem is to prove that investing in early stage companies is actually a profitable business. So we can attract more commercial grade investors into the system as well. So we are, so to speak, trying to act like a trailblazer, sort of trying to go places where currently the investors are not willing to go, just to make a point that they can actually make money with those kind of investments.
Great. Thanks, Mete. And Suzanne, do we have another question from the chat room?
Fatita, are you there with the panel?
Yes, I'm here.
Great. Well, go ahead. Thanks for joining us. Where are you joining us from?
Thank you. I am from Algeria.
Great.
Oran in Algeria.
Great. Well, thank you for joining us. Look forward to your question.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't speak English very well, but I'm going to try to have a meeting with us. I think that there isn't any problem for that. I need to know why in our country, I was in an NGO who help startup to launch her activities, and we have a problem to have funding. It's a very big problem because NGO for having money from broad companies, it needs authorization from ministry. You understand?
Yes, I do. So you're saying
okay.
Some of the administrative requirements in Algeria in order for companies to get the money are very difficult in Algeria? Is that kind of a synopsis of the question?
Foundation or organization abroad in another company, in another country.
Okay. Great. Let me.
In our company, in our country, the company don't give money easily for NGO and for entrepreneurship. It's a new in Algeria. It's a new, easy to have money.
Great. Well, that's a great question, and thank you very much for asking, and your English is excellent. Tony, I don't know if you're with us. Are you able to hear us now?
I can hear you. I'm not sure if you can hear me.
Okay, I can't hear you. Great. Well, welcome. Thank you very much. I gave a quick. Actually, maybe when you answer the question, and I'll sort of reframe it a little bit. You can just give a quick introduction of yourself. But to the Algerian student's question about the challenge now in kind of emerging economies where this is sort of new. Maybe you can talk a little bit about the work that you're doing with Up Global in Brazil, and the role that NGOs are playing, and what kind of companies. I know some of the activities that you guys do kind of range around startup weekends and other activities, but what kind of entrepreneurs are you seeing able to ultimately get money from NGOs?
Thank you, Michael. You gave me, it's perfect. I'm just would add that we started here in Brazil less than a year, actually in January, and we have been seeing a lot of growth here related to startup and the ecosystem. And regarding to the question, what I can say is we do see a lot of challenges on raising money. And if I understood the question correctly, she was asking specifically about NGOs to support entrepreneurship, right?
Yep.
Is that okay? So yeah, what we're seeing is it comes down to basically to the impacts that you are giving the ecosystem. I mean, there is a number of companies that can support you, but at the end, it comes down to what kind of results are you bringing to the ecosystem. If you're fostering entrepreneurs, or if you are helping them get funds, this kind of investment usually draws attention from the government, which makes a lot of things easier for you. Here in Brazil, it's not easy to fundraise either, but because we do have a lot of results and impact, we do have numbers to show, and ultimately that's one of the main things that the companies or the entities giving you the funds that they want to look at.
Great. Thanks, Tony. I think we have another question from the chat room. Suzanne?
We do. This is from Khalid from Saudi Arabia. How does the entrepreneur measure the shares against the investment of the angel investor or seed investors?
Okay. Do you want to try that?
Sure.
Maybe you can sort of reframe, maybe sort of a broader sort of reframe.
Sure, absolutely. So the way that we did it, in general, though, you might start off with some assumption about what your company is worth. And so you then just say their investment, adding on to that, will increase the company 20% or so on, and you increase shares in that respect. Having said that, we started off a little bit differently. We didn't come up with a valuation for the company. Our first investors invested in preferred debt, or convertible debt, I should say. So what that is that it was invested as a loan. So there was no need to actually value the company. And then at some point in the future, so after a period of time, several years, the investment converts into equity when there's an actual event, another investment event, and someone else will set the valuation. And at that point, the value of the company is set, and the shares, the debt converts into shares at that point.
Great. And I think it's an interesting question. Maybe I'll just ask a quick follow-up to you, Laura, to explain a little bit. I mean, JumpStart, as an NGO that's investing in your company, this idea of convertible debt is sometimes considered a little bit more entrepreneur-friendly than if they would have negotiated a valuation. I mean, do you want to explain a little bit about, at least from your perspective, was that convertible debt when JumpStart came in more kind of entrepreneur-friendly than if they had negotiated kind of a traditional priced equity round?
Yeah, I think it probably was more entrepreneur-friendly by not setting a valuation to start with. It does add complication, though, when you're raising more funds, because there's this debt sitting there that's accumulating interest. That's like all debt, it accumulates interest. And so it just has to be the existence of that debt has to be taken into account when the next funders come in. So I think it is more friendly. You don't have to set a valuation. You can just keep working away as hard as you can to grow your valuation. Because when you start, there's nothing to actually base a valuation on. There are no sales. There's just an idea, because they're investing at such a very early stage. So it works quite well, I think.
Great. Thanks. Great question. Another question from the chat room. Suzanne?
Yes, we have a question from Sega in North Carolina in the U.S. How do you mitigate donor fatigue as we see it today? And also, how do you engage the younger generation to invest instead of donating their time, treasure, and/or talent?
Okay, two great questions. Mete, let me put that one over to you. How do you? I mean, you have a number of donors that you work with, some large international government and organizations. How do you deal with that question of donor fatigue? How do you convince them to back you and the activities for a longer period of time?
Well, very much like a company would do. We would try to innovate how we actually connect with them and how We structure their donations into different support schemes. We deal with entrepreneurs and companies. So I think the simple question is you just have to keep on innovating. I think at one point they will be a little bit tired seeing the same offer over and over again. So we try to be creative with what we do and how we manage their money.
Great. And Tony, to the second question from the student about kind of engaging talent and some investment. I think that was the question. It's like, how do you convince sort of younger people to actually engage with company support? I mean, what are some of the things that you're doing in Brazil to get that younger generation of sort of investors and potentially mentors to engage with some of the companies in the region?
That's a great question, Michael. We've been doing a lot of events and startup weekend all over Brazil this year, and we have seen that the younger entrepreneurs and investors, they're becoming more and more involved with the ecosystem. What we do basically is present them, with good opportunities and try, like Ahmet said, try to be creative with what we're doing, and provide them with opportunities to talk to the entrepreneurs and show them their success and their failures and help them exchange experience with younger and newer entrepreneurs. And that has shown a lot of value on both sides, on people who are starting off and people who has been there for a longer time. Even though they're younger, they're young, but still they have more experience. And it has been very valuable for the ecosystem. Great.
Thanks, Tony. Laura, I've got a question. One of our students who's very skeptical about the role of government, and this week he had asked about, it's Alexander Gordopolov from Moscow. He says, aren't intermediary organizations simply fostering artificial structures? If the market were efficient, would they be needed? Maybe you can just talk about your experience. I know you discussed it in our video lecture this week of sort of moving to Cleveland from outside the region. You didn't have the network here. Maybe you can sort of talk about that question of kind of like, why is JumpStart, an intermediary organization, even needed here?
Yeah, that's a very good question. We moved to Cleveland and knew nobody and had no help we didn't have any rich uncles or people that we knew in Cleveland who could help. So the role that JumpStart played, wasn't just money, which was obviously very, very helpful, but also mentoring for us. We'd never been entrepreneurs before, and as enthusiastic and able as we are, there's an awful lot that you need to be guided in when it comes to entrepreneurship. And at the time, there were really no other entrepreneurs to find to help mentor us. So really, JumpStart facilitated some direct mentoring. That's what they gave us, but also by connecting a community together, because they were one of the initial organizations that started that, helped us see that there were other entrepreneurs out there and for us to connect with them directly. So the market just didn't exist. It's not about an efficient market. There wasn't one. And what JumpStart did was seed it by making everybody aware of who was out there. And then also helped direct mentorship in the entrepreneurship aspect of things, having goals and so on. So I feel there's definitely an excellent role for that. And the other side of it is money. JumpStart has made an enormous effort to bring money into the area, not just their own investment by investing money into Embrace, but also encouraging follow-on funding. And again, they created a market that didn't exist. There was no follow-on funding. There were no angel groups when I started up. There were no incubators or accelerators that invest money into small companies. There was nothing. Even just individual angel investors had to be teased out of the wood by JumpStart to encourage people to actually start investing in companies like ours. So I think they do have a role in creating the market, and maybe ideally in the future they won't be needed because there is an awful lot of all these activities that just naturally percolate and build. But until that time, JumpStart's definitely needed. Great.
Let's. I think it's such a good question. Let's sort of go around the horn with our panelists. Mete, do you want to address Alexander's question about are intermediary organizations like yours simply fostering artificial structures?
Not really, because I think we always have a place to act as a trust platform for entrepreneurs, for talented people who like to work with entrepreneurs, and also follow-up investors who would be willing to take up the next round of investments with those particular entrepreneurs. So we often find ourselves in a position to actually set the standards for the market because the entrepreneurs have this tendency, mostly because of our not-for-profit nature, they have this tendency to trust our judgment with valuation, with other structures, and oftentimes they just they use us as some kind of a testing platform. Where they can take the term sheet and deal with other entrepreneurs. So I think for a while, at least recently developing ecosystems like Turkey, even if we have commercial players, commercial money in the market, the not-for-profit NGOs will still have a place to act as at least as trust platforms and business platforms for new talent, etc.
Great. And maybe, Tony, maybe you can just quickly give your perspective. Why is it important that an NGO like Up Global exists in Brazil?
Yeah, in our case, the thing is we empower the grassroots movement of entrepreneurship. So we're talking about a place where there's no, actually we don't make any profit, and no one that we know of makes any profit out of running events like we do. So the only way that we could scale to the point that we got was actually being an NGO and fostering this entrepreneurship. Because at the end, we want to give everyone in the world the opportunity to experience entrepreneurship. And so I do agree with Ahmed saying that we do have this responsibility that will hardly be replaced by something other than NGO. So.
Great.
That's it.
Thanks, Tony. Another question from the chat room, Suzanne?
Yes, we have a question from, and I apologize in advance, F. Stathios. Which is the main subject that the private funds seek before they decide to invest in an NGO?
Great. So, and thank you for the question. So, maybe Mete, let me go back to you with that one. What are sort of some of the criteria when you're going and pitching, and maybe you can talk about some of the types of donors or investors that you have who support your organization. What are some of the things that you're looking for?
Some of the larger corporations, national and international, such as BP, and also the Turkish government, the Turkish Treasury. I think they always look for independence, some kind of transparency and accountability when they're working with NGOs. So they don't really like to, especially for private companies or private donors, they don't like to work with NGOs who they feel have this implied relationship with stronger organizations, such as the government. And they always like to see some kind of transparency and accountability in their processes. So we have a very sophisticated financial management infrastructure. So we managed so far $500 million US, and we can account the details down to. So I think that's very important for highly bureaucratic structures like multinationals and large corporations.
Great, thanks, Mete. Laura, one of the things that was discussed in the chat room, and we talked about it in the MOOC, was JumpStart structure of this Evergreen Fund. Maybe for the students, if you can sort of walk through a little bit, at least theoretically, how it's supposed to work when they're making an investment in you, how then what the hope is that those dollars kind of for longer term, what they do with them.
Yes, that's definitely true, and something that really actually sort of encouraged me when we took JumpStart money was that with our success, we would be helping other entrepreneurs in Northeast Ohio. So the idea is that JumpStart would invest money into our company, and over time, the value of that money has increased. And at some point in the future, a different investor comes in and buys out, or we go public, or something like that. But some event happens, and JumpStart then is paid the value of their investment by that new investor. And then what happens is that the proceeds go back into the fund, ideally with a very nice return. In the case of JumpStart and Embrace, they did get a good return. And that money then goes to fund other smaller companies. So you can sort of take that money, chunk it up into smaller pieces, put it into other startups. And ideally, that keeps happening until that there's a self-sustaining fund that just, is always turning over with exits and investments, and exits and investments. And so it's an amazing, what they call Evergreen Fund. No more money needs to be put into it.
Great, thanks, Laura. And thank you, I didn't mention, that question came from Fahad Sattar from Pakistan, so thank you, Fahad, for that question. Tony, let me pose a question to you that came from Praveen Singh from India. She was talking about the traditional, how NGOs are traditionally working in communities where they're giving money and supporting what she calls traditional charitable causes. How hard is it? I mean, here's an NGO in Brazil that's funding startup weekends and all sorts of stuff in the entrepreneurial space. Talk about that change to attract capital from donors for entrepreneurship versus traditional charitable causes.
That's a great question, Michael. And actually was something that I asked myself when I started here. It is very different from the traditional charitable. When you go to talk to the sponsors, the partners, and even to the community itself, it's different. Mainly because you're talking about entrepreneurship, so you're talking about creating value, not just creating value, but profitable business and all that. So it doesn't quite fit the charitable model. And we do have some challenges with this. But what we did is we built a model which is has been proven to be very effective. Every event that we do, even though we are non-profit and a charitable company, we do charge for the events, and we do have a return. But the return is shared with the local community, with the local leaders of that specific community. So I think this way they see the value on what we do, and they see the value of us, being a nonprofit actually, and that also help us to get a lot of support from community leaders, volunteers. So just in Brazil, we have about 600 volunteers around Brazil, and they do a great work at their community with our help and the help of our events.
Great, thanks, Tony. Luis Alberto Ruano Marón, who's in La Rioja, Spain. I've met Luis, great guy, works in the venture capital space. Would like the panel to discuss some of the non-monetary roles that intermediary organizations play, such as training and education for entrepreneurs. And maybe, Laura, you can address that. You talked about in the MOOC when Mark Smith, your EIR mentor from JumpStart, went over to a big meeting with you in London. So I think there's things that you've spoken to that indicate that it's beyond just the dollars associated with the NGO. Maybe you can talk a little bit more about that. How important has the non-monetary piece of JumpStart supports been for you?
Yes, it's very, very important. As I mentioned, there's a sort of a mentoring component of the JumpStart's assistance. So that was very helpful. And also just the fact that we'd been picked by JumpStart made us stand out, that there was another very valid organization that had believed in us. So it gave us credibility. But at each stage of our development, JumpStart added more, a different kind of service. So at the beginning, it was mentorship, getting us up and running, focusing on milestones, maybe brainstorming other approaches, but being sort of helping us along that way. But later on, they helped us find follow-on funding. So the venture capital investment that we ended up with, they helped source that investor who was fairly local, so still in Ohio, but not in Cleveland. But they were always out there banging the drum on our behalf to say, there's this great company, would you consider looking at them? And so I talked to a lot of investors that they drummed up. And then later on, once we had venture capital investing, and we were sort of, I suppose, a bit of a graduate from the program where they were less involved, but they still had gave us help with finding talent. So hiring people is hard, and helping us find the right people. We paid for the services, but a very, very minimal amount compared to the market value of the services. So a recruiter actually helped us recruit people. And we also got some guidance. So we actually had the sort of head of talent sit in on some very key interviews that we had, just to give us another pair of eyes on what the kind of person we were looking for was. So there was a lot of different help that we got. And I guess the final one is they're always out there talking to the media about the different portfolio companies. And so we got a lot of press from, got a lot of media coverage just from JumpStart being out there talking to CNN or big magazines and things like that. So we would always show up because it's easy to talk about pets, quite frankly.
Great. Great. I have another question that I'll pose to Mete from Meredith Robertson, from the U.S., from North Carolina. One of the things she talks about in here was she calls it a lack of transparency in intermediary organization in her community, in that often little is known about kind of the management and then how funding decisions are made. And I think it's a really interesting question. Mete, what is your process by which you do due diligence on opportunities? And then I think to the second part of Meredith's question is how do you communicate that to entrepreneurs or funders that may be sort of coming through so they can get comfortable with what you're doing?
We have multiple schemes. We have a soft loan scheme where we deal with independent evaluators. And we oftentimes we share the evaluation reports of these independent evaluators with the entrepreneurs or the companies. So we try to provide full transparency with our processes. But I think when we come back to the whole process of evaluating and transparency, I think you have to basically walk the entrepreneur through the process before starting anything with him or her. And so we usually tell them that we say no very quickly, but for us saying yes takes time. So they have to understand that this is a process and there are lots of different criteria works. And we'd like to do we try to do lots of actually presentations on how our evaluation process works, and sort of do clinics, help desks, make introductions for them to other investors or support organizations, so they can actually sort of in a loose sense shop around. So we basically try to explain them this is a process. And we always try to make them understand that there is some subjectivity involved because every organization have its own priorities and strategies and portfolio strategies or whatever. So they have to understand there is some kind of a, subjectivity involved with the decision process as well. We often have satisfied customers, but sometimes you have people who really don't like the way you work, but that's part of the business, I guess.
Great. Thanks, Mete. We had a question, and Tony, let me pose it to you, from Devine Asaba from Brussels, Belgium. He was talking about the role, he talks about the role of banks as intermediaries, and certainly they wouldn't necessarily be intermediaries as we're defining them in terms of NGOs, but he says, you know, what role do banks play in the developing countries between young investors seeking debt capital through borrowing and depositors seeking interest income? Do you find that the banks are involved in any of your efforts with Up Global in Brazil, and are there ways, even though sort of traditional risk-taking at this stage of companies is very difficult for banks, are you finding any ways to get sort of the banks a little bit more comfort or exposure to entrepreneurs in Brazil?
Michael, that's a great question, and it comes at a great time for what's going on here in Brazil, because I do believe that in the traditional model, let's say like this, I don't know, but I'm not sure if I could say that they do play you know, a highly important role at the early stage. Of course, at the later stage, yes, but at the early stage, maybe not. But what we've been seeing here in Brazil is that they are, the banks are getting more and more interested. Actually, the corporations are getting more and more interested in what the startups are doing in terms of how they can become, you know, partners or actually providers, service providers and solution providers for them. And they actually, but they don't, that's not the only thing that they want. They want to start a relationship with them as early as possible. And that's a good thing for us, because we start having relationships with entrepreneurs from day one. These corporations, like there's a bank here, they just started acceleration program for financial technology startups, and we are actually talking about become partners and run startup weekends focused on financial tech. So to end the answer, they do play a very important role, but I think they are starting to understand how they can help from the bottom of the base, you know, of the pyramid, you know, to the new entrepreneurs, and then work the relationship up until they can start having them as customers or even partners or investors, you know.
Great, thanks, Tony. Laura, let me ask you a question that was posed from Lucas Koniecki from the Czech Republic, and he wants you to, he's looking for an answer to what are the best, when evaluating intermediary organizations, maybe from your perspective, what is the most important metric to use in evaluating long-term success? Is it number of jobs created in supported businesses like your own, average salary of employees? What else? I mean, as you think about what you've done with Embrace and the number of employees you have here, and you reflect into JumpStart and the Intermediary, you know, what should matter to the community and their investment in you?
Wow, that's a tough question. I think, so we've created 60 jobs, and they're good paying jobs. Not all are in Northeast Ohio. There are about 10 of them are outside. I think that is one component. But obviously 60 jobs, well, that's good right now. You know, that's a drop in the bucket in Northeast Ohio. But as we grow, ideally we just, because we doubled last year, we might double next year. That's good growth. The follow-on funding, I know, is a very important measure because that assists us in growing. The jobs will come, and the taxes that people pay and the sort of circulation of funds in the economy will pick up if we can grow more. So I think that the follow-on funding, first of all, says here's a company that's continuing and growing. Other people believe in it, not just the venture development organization. And that in itself will generate cash flow and revenue, because there's a lot of money that you pay money out to your employees who then buy other services. We hire other consulting firms or whatever in the area, and they have employees, they support them. So the money multiplies. And so I think, the jobs, one component, the follow-on funding to me is probably the biggest one, and the overall revenue growth of the company.
And what about, let me just do one quick follow-up, Laura. What about exit? What about, many people will say, and we talk about it a bit in the MOOC, that JumpStart, until embraces big IPO or you're acquired by a big acquirer, and we see that money flow back to the Evergreen Fund, that JumpStart truly won't have been successful. How important is exit in the equation?
Well, exit is definitely going to be important because that's what funds the other companies in the area. It's a part of that multiplier effect, and allows JumpStart to move on and to put the resources into companies that need it more. Again, though, it's one component, because we were hiring people, spending money outside of our company and spreading and multiplying it elsewhere before we exited. So the exit is one aspect of that. Great.
Good. We have another question from Praveen Singh in India, and Mete, I'll pose it to you. They talk about the role of intermediaries in helping ward off the stigma of failure in society. I had a chance to spend a little bit of time in Turkey, where we met 2 summers ago. Talk about what you're doing, kind of broadly speaking, to help entrepreneurs be willing to take these risks, to start companies and deal with that stigma of failure.
It's part of the culture. I think failing in a country like Turkey, not necessarily socially, but legally, is very difficult, because I think it will take time to fold your company and get rid of all obligations of tax and social security payments. So there's always this intimidation of procedures, etc. So we try to work with the entrepreneurs and try to make them understand the risks, and basically help them plan their advancement through different stages once they are completely ready for taking additional risk. Because I think by nature, most of these entrepreneurs are very aggressive alpha characters. So they like to set up this Google tomorrow, right? They just want to hire lots of people, make lots of investments, and sort of play big and win big. So we try to help them understand that they have to pace themselves. They have to define these milestones, and if they fail, which is part of the business, part of this entrepreneurship activity, they can actually manage their risks. So we try to help them basically avoid these catastrophic, very dramatic situations, and which also escalate through different channels to discourage more of these entrepreneurs coming to the market. So we try to be honest with them. That's the best we can do most of the time.
Great. And Tony, do you want to reflect on, I don't know much about Brazilian culture and sort of mentality around failure, but can you reflect on some of the things that you're doing in your community around this question?
I'm sorry, Michael, who was that question directed to?
I was going to ask it back to Tony, sorry.
Okay. So just the way that we deal with failure here, actually not global and around the world, is we just give entrepreneurs or everyone who's interested in testing an idea a 54-hour laboratory, you can call it like this, to test the idea. And we encourage people not to fail, but like to move fast. And then we show them if it happens so that they fail, that they can, come back up and try again. But just like Matt said, here in Brazil, failure is culturally is not. It's being recognized that failure is sometimes it's okay. Actually, it's not, and sometimes it's necessary to innovate. But legally is also a big issue here in Brazil because sometimes you can open a register a company, and if you ended up failing and you need to shut down the company, it can take you up to, I don't know, maybe even more than 10 years to get it, terminated, legally speaking. And that's a huge cost. And it can bring you up to the personal level. You can be responsible for the company that you closed for a long time after it's closed. So, but culturally speaking, we're doing great progress on this, and Startup Weekend has been helping this a lot through the 54-hour event where you can go there and fail and overcome the failure, test it over and over, and at the end you're gonna see that success only comes after failing a few times. So.
Great, thanks, Tony. Suzanne, we have a question from the chat room.
We do. We have a question coming in from the U.S. In my role as a corporate citizenship manager today, I see lots of requests for funding and support. How do you differentiate yourself so that you are the right match aligned with investors' business strategy? Are there times you collaborate with similar organizations to request greater funding and co-sponsorship?
Mete, you probably do actually both Mete and Tony, but let me frame it to Mete. I mean, to this question of sort of as you try to engage with corporations to support what you're doing, can you take that question?
I think what we are trying to do is first we try to understand how they work, what they are looking for in the market, what their priorities are, what kind of visibility they want to accomplish with their support of entrepreneurship or technology development, and try to, again, be innovative with our models and give them some kind of an access and sort of control about the model. And also we try to help them basically integrate with the ecosystem. So that's, I think, usually beyond just giving money and having some kind of a label or their brand on a project. They like to also understand, see what's going on in the ecosystem, what's going on with the entrepreneurship networks or the market. So we try to give them sort of a window, of course, keeping our values and standards and independence and transparency intact. So we try to develop some kind of a value proposition and based on our understanding of their priorities. That's our business development.
Great. And Tony, Up Global internationally has some of the biggest names in sort of corporate support: Google, Coca-Cola, Sprint, some others. How much are you also doing work with local corporations to support what you're doing in Brazil?
Yes, Michael. We have a partner here in Brazil. It's the biggest education group. It's the second biggest education group in Brazil. They have 80 schools and universities throughout Brazil, and they see a lot of value in what we do because they want to. They're actually looking to innovate their model, their business model, and bring innovation inside to the companies. And we try to show them that they can find this through the startups or even the entrepreneurs that they can find at our events. We also have a very interesting program that we run. It's called Startup Weekend Corporate. And we run that inside of the companies. Like Coca-Cola, for example, they have run this several times in several places in the world, of course, in the US, but also in the Middle East, and 2 weeks ago here in Brazil. And it was very successful. It brings a lot of discussions to the company, and it gets a lot of different departments involved, and they see a lot of value on this. So it's a great tool to bring innovation and entrepreneurship inside of the corporation.
Great. Thanks, Tony. Suzanne, another question from the chat room.
Yes, we have a question that's coming in from Algeria. Can you speak about how NGO supports entrepreneurial ecosystem? What kind of activities and programs are best to develop?
Sure. Laura, do you want to try to, I'm just trying to think of how to frame it just with the many things that we've talked about here. I mean, maybe what's missing? I mean, because we have a pretty rich NGO support. JumpStart is just one. There's some other ones. What else? What's missing in our ecosystem? And maybe do we always need to look to NGOs to provide that?
I think that's a pretty good question. I think that NGOs are just a piece of the ecosystem. And in fact, for the system to be self-sustainable, that it actually has to be driven by entrepreneurs. And that doesn't mean that NGOs don't have a place, but that they're one of the, it's like a jigsaw puzzle. The jigsaw puzzle has to be sort of overall, the entrepreneur is putting the pieces together, but the entrepreneur also helps and assists in the ecosystem. So if there's anything missing, I think it's up to the entrepreneur to actually sort of speak up and bring it. So for example, I felt that there were very few women that had raised venture capital funding in Northeast Ohio. And in fact, when I started, I couldn't find one woman who had raised venture capital funding in Northeast Ohio. And so later on, when I thought, what could I contribute to the ecosystem, I started up a mentoring group for women who were looking to raise venture capital or outside funding of any kind, so that I could help and assist, and then find other women who had since raised money to help contribute to that. So I think that the NGOs offer a nice structure. It's like the I guess infrastructure that we can all then build on, and that the entrepreneurs fill in between what actually is missing. Does that make sense?
That's great. It's great. And because we're running out of time, let me, Mete and Tony, maybe I can first to you, Mete, and then Tony, maybe just a quick reflection on sort of, because it's interesting, I think, what some of the things that Laura's talking about. I mean, Bradfeld and startup communities is like, communities need to be these things need to come from entrepreneur driven. And that maybe minimizes, one could argue, the role that government should play or NGOs. I mean, any perspectives from you, Mete, about the role that NGOs should or shouldn't play in a community?
I think that one of the biggest hurdles in ecosystems like ours is the information asymmetry. So access for entrepreneurs on market information, talent information for experts that can help them with their projects or companies is very limited. So let me give you an example. We basically identified this woman who was a graduate of the Singularity University from California, and not many people knew about her. We promoted her in one of our speaking venues. We promoted her ideas or her expertise with a sort of a 10-minute video clip in our website. Now she's a well-known speaker, thinker, sort of inspirer or whatever. And she works with some of the startups in design thinking, developing their design processes, etc. So it was actually our platform was the coming out for her, and we try to do that with reports. We try to do that with different speaking venues, making introductions to different people. So I think we're trying to overcome this information asymmetry and sort of making the entrepreneurs work with this, group of usual suspects, the same circle of people, 5 or 10 people in the ecosystem, which is pretty much inbreeding. It's not taking the ecosystem to the next level. It's not really helping the ecosystem evolve. So we're trying to break that cycle. And with our trust a factor of our brand, I think we are one of the few organizations that can actually do that. And people trust who we promote, etc. That might be an interesting angle for the NGOs and the ecosystems.
Great, thanks. And Tony, any sort of final reflections?
Well, yes, I think this is a great question and a great discussion right now. We just released a white paper in partnership with Brad Feld, and he's actually one of our board members. And one of our principles is that the entrepreneurs should actually be the one leading the ecosystem and the movement per se. So at this white paper, we have 5 ingredients, we call them, that are pertinent to a strong ecosystem for startups and innovation. And we cannot, NGOs cannot deal with all of them. But we do have the let's say the power to bring people and to empower them to go there and try to make a difference. We're talking about government regulation, capital, culture, density, and talent. So those ingredients we can try to start conversations and try to think with entrepreneurs what can be done. But at the end, the entrepreneurs are the ones that have to go there and talk with those entities responsible for those ingredients and make things happen. We just try to empower them, and everything that we do is looking for them. It's for them and listening to what they have to tell us. But yes, I mean, NGOs have a big important part on fostering these ecosystems, but we're just one of the pieces. The entrepreneurs are the one that has to make the machine move around.
Great, well put. Well, that's great. Well, it's been a quick hour, which was fast for me. Yeah. Tony and Mete, thank you so much for joining us via Webex. Laura, thanks for coming in the studio. This is great. And to the students, thank you for everything that you're doing in the course. And hopefully for those who aren't watching this live and you're watching this via tape, that you'll learn from this discussion. We'll be back together on October the 30th. At noon for a discussion on the role of anchor institutions. That's the role of universities and what they play to support entrepreneurship. And again, keep up the great work. Loving your personal learning assignments and your contributions to the forums. And until we see each other next time, I will see you in class. Thank you.